It's been several days. I apologize, far longer than I promised. I tried writing last night and the night before. But my brain can only take so much if I think too hard or fully immerse myself in the memories. It hurts, it really fucking hurts, to the point of me screaming. I can't stop screaming. And it feels like I'm drowning, but I want to continue. It's hard to look back on what myself and my classmates went through. The filthy secret our town hid from us for 18 years. I have to. If I don't, everything that happened will be nothing but a memory. A haunting nightmare in the back of my mind that keeps me up most nights. I know this sounds awful, and if I'm honest, I feel like I am hurting myself, punishing myself, but I want to relive those emotions. What I felt, what we felt. I want to go back and experience it all again. So I can tell myself that it's real. It happened. For me to fully accept what happened to us, it needs to be in writing. I read your comments and I would rather not respond to them until I am finished writing our story. My story, Bobby and Nick's, the story behind Sevel's existence as well as our own. If I'm going to tell you everything, then there will be more parts. I'm not sure how many. As many as it takes, I guess, in a way. I feel like I'm turning my experience into a book of sorts, anything to bring light to Aceville and what they did to us when Nick rescued me from my inevitable fate as a red. As a defect, I was still seeing my mother holding the gun pointing between my eyes. I was still seeing her vacant eyes drinking me in as a target. Not a daughter, but I don't want to talk about my mom. If I do, I'll scream. If I do, I'll throw this laptop at the wall. I'm not going to talk about my mother. I'm not going to talk about my mother. I am not going to talk about my mother. Here's a question for you. When you look at your best friend, what do you think? Do you feel happiness? Melancholy? Maybe that person is no longer close to you and is a stranger. Does it hurt when you catch glimpses of them? I know it does. I know exactly how you feel. You have memories with them. Those you have and will cherish forever, and yet when you look at them now after so many years of being apart, it is like looking at a stranger, like looking through a foggy mirror, as if nothing was there in the first place. Instead of what you had, there is nothing. A deep cavern of darkness and emptiness where something used to be. That was the exact feeling I had when I looked at Nick. When I tried to piece together my best friend from the splintered pieces of him I was staring at. It was dark, and yet I saw all of him, and I didn't want to. I wanted the darkness to consume us completely so I didn't have to register what I was looking at. Nicholas Castor had been one of the most attractive boys in our year. Blessed with boyish curls and freckles speckling pale cheeks. Now I was looking at someone who sounded like him. Smelled like him, but wasn't him. He couldn't be. The Nick I'd known since freshman year was textbook boy next door, in my blurry vision and consumed in the darkness of overhead trees. All I saw was red where his face was supposed to be. All I saw was red, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand that the figure standing in front of me was Nick, because Nick wasn't. He wasn't this. I rarely saw him cry, and this Nick was sobbing. His chest heaving, his breath short and panicky. My head spun when his hand snaked around my bicep, and he yanked me to the ground with a forceful tug. When my knees hit the dirt, I barely felt the impact. Lowering myself, I pressed myself into the forest floor. Nick didn't let go of me, only strengthening his rock-hard grip on my arm. "We need to stay down," he gasped out, his voice slurred and wrong. I kept getting the overwhelming urge to check him. I had to know he was okay, except when I tried. Nick hissed at me not to move. He let out a strangled breath, pulling me further into the dirt. I choked on the taste of moss and old leaves. But I was thankful to be with him, far away from what should have been my execution at the hands of her. Chances are the bastards figured out I escaped. In the distance I glimpsed a searchlight illuminate the darkness beginning to sweep the perimeter of the camp. After what felt like years of lying in the dirt, waiting for the lights to dim down, they did. When I finally lifted my head and forced myself to look at Nick, a fresh slither of bile crawled up my throat. I lost my breath all over again. Everything that I'd known was gone. His curls, which had been sheared away leaving him half bald. The flaps of bloodied flesh that used to be Nick's cheeks almost looked like they were moving, like they were alive. His right eye hung out of its socket in almost a cartoon-like fashion. His clothes from earlier had been replaced with clinical white shorts and t-shirt, both of which were splattered red. Different hues of the color splashed down his front. He was barefoot, his knees sinking into the mud. I was hit with a memory. The two of us and Bobby at 13 years old sitting in the dirt with a picnic laying out in front of us. I remember not caring about the state of my legs and clothes. Back then, Nick had been grinning through a mouthful of PB&J. Now, though, my friend looked so vulnerable, so childlike, like he was 13 again. I couldn't stop staring at him. He offered me a smile which sickened me, because unlike his face, his teeth were perfect. Nick had been bullied in the 4th grade for having crooked teeth. Now, however, they were straightened and pearly white, almost unnatural white. That didn't make any sense. Whatever had happened had ruined his face and fixed his teeth. I couldn't resist, sitting on my knees. I reached out with shaking hands and grasped his face, cradling it to make sure it was his. And it was. It was still the Nicholas Castor I'd known since freshman year. He had the same smell of cheap Axe spray and the earthy, flowery aroma of the exotic plants in his bedroom. It had always been the 3 of us, me, Nick and Bobby, the 3 musketeers. Nothing would take that away, even when I could barely recognize him anymore. Nick pulled away after a moment, like he was ashamed. But I knew Nick. I knew he would never show me that he was hurt, ashamed, in pain, even when I knew he was. That wasn't him. I know. He let out a shaky laugh and turned away. His right eye bounced below its socket and I had to avert my gaze. If I didn't, I'd laugh. Or scream. I'm hideous. I'm sure if I didn't feel like I was on cloud 9 right now, I'd be freaking out. He cocked a brow. I actually look pretty cool though, right? You know, like a cyborg. He was smiling, and I don't know how he was smiling, but the hysterical sobs escaping his lips told a whole different story. I felt my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't break when I was all he had at that moment. Bobby was in that building, and I had no idea if she was dead or alive. But I had to focus on Nick. I had to focus on keeping him calm, keeping him from breaking apart. Nick, I couldn't think straight. Never mind, speak. What happened? The words were bubbling in my throat, ready to burst out in anger and pain that someone had done this to him, that someone was going to do this to Bobby. However, I managed to hold myself. I stayed calm for his benefit and let him catch his own breath. Allowing his body to grow still, I pulled off my shirt and scrunched it into a ball, gently dabbing at the bloody splotches on his face. The cool breeze tickled my bare skin, and it felt good, pulling me back to reality. It's going to be okay, I whispered. We'll get you help. It was a relief to be rid of the shirt which had labeled me as a defect. When I gently pressed it to Nick's right eye socket, careful not to press too much pressure, he winced and let out a soft whine, but he didn't speak. I'm okay, he whimpered, his left eye surveying me in the dark. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I found myself lost in my own melancholy. I couldn't stop thinking about Bobby. She was a blue. She was exactly what they wanted. But Nick, he was a purple. He was wanted too. So why had they done that to him? Addie. He took a shaky step away from me and folded his arms across his chest, his gaze on the ground, unsteady on his feet. Nick fought to stay upright. I grabbed his arm, stealing him. He paced back and forth, his breathing growing progressively more and more erratic. We're getting Bobby out of there, but I need you to do something for me first. I nodded, but the question was spewing from my mouth before I could stop it. I couldn't stop tears running down my face. I tried to blink them away, but they kept coming. Nick, what did they do to you? He held my gaze for a moment, before turning around and stripping off his own shirt. Again, unlike his face, his body was perfect, more than perfect. Nick had never been bothered about maintaining a figure. He was naturally thin with a good metabolism. He didn't need to go to the gym, but under the trees in minimal light, I saw toned back muscles. When he turned to face me, his lower torso was ripped to perfection. Again, I thought, my head spinning, why was everything else perfect except his face? It was almost a laughable sight, but I didn't laugh, not when the boy could barely stand straight. There's something inside me, he whispered, scratching at the back of his neck. His fingernails clawed at the flesh like an animal, frenzied and desperate. You need to get it out, like right now. Before I could speak, he was pulling something from his jeans, something that glinted in the dark. Nick clenched it between his fist, his teeth gritted. I need you to cut it out, he said. I was lucky. My machine was faulty, so it wasn't able to complete whatever it was trying to do. He gestured to his face with the blade. That's why I'm half done, if you can even call it that. His words sent shivers rattling down my spine. My gaze went to his toned chest and perfect teeth. That's what happened, whatever processing meant. It was full body. Nick's had gone wrong and had messed up his face. I opened my mouth to ask why they were doing this to us, but he was thrusting the blade into my hand. I've tried, Addie, he choked out. I've tried to get it out myself, but I can't. I can't fucking reach it. Letting out a hiss of frustration, Nick curled my fingers around the blade. It's some kind of chip or tracker, something that they're inevitably going to activate, and then we're both fucked. I found myself nodding, biting my lip to suppress a scream when his quaking fingers danced over a scar marked into his skin, the incision point. I thought, it must be. I don't know what possessed me, With the blade in my hand, I started forwards. But I couldn't do it, even when I knew it was dangerous. That I could lose Nick at any point. His words, what he had said, described, were sending me into a tailspin, all at once. The bottom fell out of me. I shook my head and staggered back, tripping over a rock jutting from the ground. I can't, I squeaked. I was trying to ignore it, but my body was in fight or flight mode. I had to find Bobby. I had to find her and get her out, before it happened to her. That was all I could think. My mouth shut to stop a screech tearing from my throat. I needed to find her. The thought was driving me fucking crazy. I couldn't think of anything but Bobby. I didn't notice I was kneeling in the dirt, my head between my knees, until I was struggling to breathe. Inhale and exhale. That's what it took. That's what was supposed to help a panic attack. But it wasn't. It wasn't working. I was screaming into my lap, my body shaking, my hands clawing at my hair. Seeing Nick like that and knowing what they were capable of. The people who had looked after us for 18 years and thrown us like lambs to the slaughter. I couldn't breathe. I was going to die. That was all I could think. My lungs felt starved of oxygen. My chest, it hurt. My stomach felt like it was trying to projectile into my throat. Addie. Nick's voice was a gentle murmur I couldn't ignore. I felt his soft touch tingle across my arms as if unsure whether to grab me or not. But he did. He gripped gently, pulling me to my feet, his sticky hands coming to cradle my face, forcing me to look at him. You can do this, he said, and when I shook my head and tried to pull away, he tightened his grip. I know you're scared, and you need some kind of reassuring pep talk. Nick choked out a laugh. Trust me, I'd give you one if we had time. But we don't, Addie. Okay, I realized Nick was crying. And Nick never cried. When I offered him my scrunched up shirt to use as a gag, he shook his head. Just do it. I complied. I had to squint to see the incision properly. When I stuck the blade in and made a small cut, he didn't even flinch. It's okay. Nick reassured me to keep going. I can't feel it. Can't feel it, I hissed out. My hand holding the scalpel was shaking. What do you mean you can't feel it? Nick made a shrugging motion. They had me blissed out on anesthesia. I can't feel a thing. I haven't been able to feel for half an hour now, maybe more, though maybe that's a good thing. I didn't reply, my gaze on the cut, slicing deeper. Blood pooled from the wound and I blotted it with my shirt. Nick, swallowing hard. I focused on getting as much out of him as possible. I hated that I was doing this to him, forcing him to relive what had happened to him. What are they doing in there? For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to respond. All at once it was like his whole body was reacting to my words, beginning to rattle once more. His teeth were chattering, every word caught in a hysterical breath. It's a factory, Addie. It's a fucking factory. He whimpered, like a conveyor belt. We were sorted into colors, right? Red, purple, and blue. Reds were killed, and purples and blues. We were taken in that building. Blues went upstairs. The last time I saw Bobby, she was being herded away with a bunch of others, and we were taken into this room. It was a bright room. It hurt my eyes, and we were all told we were going to be processed. His whole body shuddered and I paused with the scalpel for a moment. There was barely any light, so I had to squint. At first I thought it was a trick in the dark to confuse me, but when I looked closer, there it was. Nick was right. Something small and metal, like a grain of rice, was sandwiched inside the cut. It's okay. I grabbed onto his shoulders and squeezed hard, stealing him to reality. It's okay, Nick. I'm here. Keep going. I urged him. If I could keep Nick talking, I could kill two birds with one stone, get the tracker out of his neck and find out what the camp were doing to blues and purples. I bit so hard into my lower lip I tasted blood, which anchored me to reality. Nick's words were sending my thoughts into a tailspin. Processing. That word kept popping up, and it was making me progressively more nauseous. What does processing mean? I whispered. You keep saying the word processing. Nodding, Nick exhaled shakily. It was a machine, he said softly. We were made to lie down on these chairs, like the ones at the dentist. These machines came down from the ceiling, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't get out. They had me tied down, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fucking breathe. When his body jolted suddenly, I withdrew the scalpel from the cut where I was trying to use it to dig out the tracker, keeping a gentle hold on his shoulder. I fought against a cry of my own. Mine was faulty, he whispered. Mine was faulty. How lucky is that? Right. The purples were supposed to be fixed. We were supposed to be made perfect. With an explosive laugh his body rattled again. They injected me with something to screw with my brain. Take me to fucking Candyland. But the thing was faulty, so all it did was fuck up my face. When Nick trailed off, I thought he was done. But after a pause, he tensed. And I felt his chest racking with sobs. I felt his legs struggling to stay upright. I can still hear them. Addie. It was almost out. I managed to scoop up the tracker. But the incision was too small. Hear who? Nick. Them. His words came out in a broken wail. I can still hear the sounds of blades and saws and knives. And cutting, and they screamed. Addie. They screamed until the shit they gave us took effect. But it didn't. It didn't work on me because mine was faulty. So oh God, I had to listen to it. When he bowed his head, I took the opportunity to pull out the chip, but it was caught on something. My hands were slick with his blood. And I forced myself to stay calm. Nick was sobbing uncontrollably. And I couldn't console him, not when he was in that state, his mind somewhere else entirely. Caught in that memory, I couldn't feel anything, but I could hear it. He said stiffly, I could hear what they were doing to me. I could hear the blades slicing into my skin and ripping away my flesh, tearing at my lips and my hair, scraping my freckles and my flaws, the spots I've had since birth, even my eye. They were doing something to me, Addie. They were trying to make me like Bobby, like the Blues. They were trying to make me perfect. Jay, just like them. I've got it. I let out a relieved breath, pulling out the tracker. Pinched between my thumb and forefinger, it was tiny. A blue light emitting from the base. When I got a proper look at it, it reminded me of a bug, and I swore there were tiny metal antennas sticking from the front. I expected Nick to reply, but he didn't. He stayed very still, his head bowed. I don't think he noticed I'd gotten the chip out. I crushed it between my fingers and dropped it on the ground. When I gently turned him around, Nick's gaze was on the ground. His voice was a low murmur, like he was reliving it. They were supposed to fix me, he whispered, but instead they turned me into this. He shuddered. I was waiting for them to scrape the flesh off my bones. But they stopped, and I was conscious enough to know what was happening. I got out of my restraints when the machine stopped moving. I think the process was done, or at least it was supposed to be done. When I got up, I saw the others. They were lying down like me, but they were out of it, and they weren't like me. They weren't mutilated and bloody like me. I checked everyone. Noah Hargreaves and Cass Blake, Danny Rue, all of them. They were just lying there after fucked up plastic surgery, and they were like nothing I've seen before. They were perfect. I cut in, and his head jerked up in surprise. He nodded. Yeah. Nick swiped at his good eye. Yeah, they were perfect. Then, he continued, I ran. I yanked off one of the blades from one of those machines and I made a break for it. There were no guards. At least there weren't in the room I was in. So I ran, and I found you. When he caught my eye, Nick seemed to snap out of it, blinking rapidly. He scrunched up his face like he was coming out of a trance. His hand went to the back of his neck, grazing the cut. Did you get it out? I nodded. It's gone, I said shakily. It reminded me of a bug. A bug? Yeah, it looked like it had antennae. Something had been bothering me. And it seemed the best time to say it. Those trackers, were they inside us before camp? Or were you inserted with one when you were taken? He shrugged, running a hand through what was left of his hair. That's what I was afraid of. It would make sense how they knew exactly where we were when we were planning to bail town. Swallowing hard, I gingerly pressed my fingers to the back of my neck. How did you know there was a tracker inside you? That machine must have caught my neck, he muttered. All I know is I felt something. Moving. Thinking back to the tracker, my skin crawled. Nick let out a sharp exhale. He looked like he might say something before what sounded like the love child of a dentist drill and car alarm slammed into my skull. The force of it nearly took me to my knees, but Nick's grasp held me upright. I slammed my hands over my ears. Fuck, Nick yelled over the sound. That's the alarm. They're probably looking for me. His hand traveled up my arm, and he pulled me forwards. If we're getting Bobby out. We're going now? Okay. The guards should be distracted, so if we keep a low profile, we should be fine. Before I could answer, he was wrapping me into a hug, and I missed those hugs. I thought I'd be hugging him like that when we left for college and parted ways. But that life of mine was gone. It'll be okay. We're getting Bobby, and we're going away from here. All of us. I don't know. We'll change our names and live in La or something. Nick chuckled. I'll make it as a rock star. And you two will be models or TV stars. Something cool like that. You know, I was already clinging onto his promises of a life far away from Aceville. One of our own. Right. I found myself spluttering, stumbling in the dark. The alarms were still blaring, branches scratching at my bare legs. But I was on a beach somewhere. At least in my mind. Miami or California. under a crystal blue sky. Nick was on his knees searching for something. I stood and wrapped my arms around myself to keep warm. I wouldn't think about Bobby. That's what I kept telling myself. I wouldn't think about what Nick had gone through. And if that was what processing meant for purples, what did it mean for blues? We'll live in one of those fancy apartments, I shouted, pressing my hands over my ears to block out the screeching alarms. We'll get jobs, or go to college, Nick continued in sharp breaths. He picked up my discarded shirt and threw it at me. Wear it inside out until we get inside. That way they won't clock you're a red. Nick pulled on his own shirt, and I had no choice but to do what he said. My shirt was damp with Nick's blood, but I forced it over my head anyway, grabbing his hand. I didn't want to let go. I was scared that if I did, I'd lose him, for real this time, not just the memories of him. The face I'd grown up with, all of him. Nick broke out into a grin, and for a moment I didn't feel helpless. The crushing weight on my chest lifted slightly. What? He gestured to his face, cocking a brow. Does it look bad? Opening my mouth to try and say no. Try and sugarcoat it. I realized he didn't deserve that. You look fucking horrific. I managed to get out, even when tears were welling in my eyes again, though Nick just shoved me playfully, giving my hand a squeeze. It hurt me that he was trying to reassure me and keep me from splintering, uncaring about himself, though part of me knew he wouldn't allow himself to break, because if he did, so would I, and we would never get Bobby out. Shooting me another grin with two white teeth, Nick started forwards, pulling me with him. See, that's the Addy I know. I kept to his side as we marched through the thicket of trees. When we approached the camp once again, the top of the building poking through the trees, Nick stumbled. I'd noticed he'd gotten clumsy-footed, struggling to walk straight without my help. Nick, I gripped his hand so tight I felt my nails slice into his flesh. Can you walk? He shot me a pained smile. Barely, slowly. We edged towards the building. The bodies of the dead kids were being picked up and thrown in a pile, like they were trash, with one hand covering his severed eye and the other clutching mine. Nick pulled me inside. It reminded me of a school mixed with a hospital. Every wall was white, the floor matching. I was immediately blinded by bright light. I tried not to look at Nick, but it was impossible not to. He stood out in the allure, his once handsome face reduced to ugly strips of flesh, his right eye hanging cartoonishly out of its socket. The freckles I had known since I was a kid were gone, scraped into oblivion with the rest of the memory of him. There was a long, narrow corridor that seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning. We made our way slowly, ducking down when guards passed ahead. I could hear voices getting closer. Nick pulled me to his side, his breath warm in my ear. If I can remember correctly, it's 3 floors up. When I was taken to be processed, I overheard one of them say blues are on the 3rd floor. He gasped out. They're taken to be polished and straightened out, while purples are fixed. He used air quotes with one hand. And reds. He trailed off. I'm sorry about, it's fine, I whispered, though it wasn't fine. I felt wrong, filthy. My muddy feet tainting perfect white marble flooring. I was the defect. I was supposed to die outside, by my mother's hand. Nick, strangely, looked like he belonged, even if his clothes were spattered red. How do you know so much? I said in a sharp breath as we digressed across the corridor. Nick seemed to know where he was going. I was supposed to be out of it, he murmured, pulling me further into an expanse of white. But they couldn't even do that right. So when I couldn't scream anymore, I focused on their voices. I focused on anything that wasn't the blades slicing into my face. Drills and saws and blades scooping my eye out and slicing into layer after layer of skin. He broke out into a shaky hiss. They said blues were being processed upstairs, and reds were ready for incineration. Incineration. Something cold slithered down my spine. The reds weren't just killed, they were wiped away. No traces of them left. We need to get you help, I managed to whisper. Nick laughed, but it wasn't his laugh, the one I knew. It was harsh and twisted. Like I said, they pumped me with enough drugs so I didn't feel anything. Pretty sure it's going to wear off soon though. I spotted a trash can overflowing with something, and when we got closer I realized what it was that I was looking at. I was seeing bloody clothes stained blue and purple, shirts and jeans and dresses all drenched red, but they still had telltale traces of spray paint rings. Nick grabbed a sweater and pants for himself, and a bundle of light pink for me. Put these on, quickly. He struggled to pull off his bloodied shirt, his eye bouncing from his socket. It reminded me of a cartoon I'd seen as a kid. He straightened out the sweater, wincing at the scarlet stains. If we're going to get Bobby out of here, we act like purples. I tried not to think about the clothes I was throwing on. Sadie Lily had been wearing them. The light pink blouse. The purple ring had ruined it. The material was damp in my hands, warm and wet between my fingers. I had to swallow bile stuck at the back of my throat. My fingers itched to look through the pile, look for the dress that Bobby had been wearing before she was taken. It was her favorite. I'd been there in the clothes store when she insisted on trying it on, spinning around for me. While Nick pretended to snap photos with his imaginary camera, I was trapped in that memory, in phantom laughter, before I was pulled back to the present, back to my reality. I was playing with the seam of Sadie Lily's blouse when Nick hurried to what looked like a classroom door. He pressed his face against the glass. "This is where I was taken," he said stiffly, hesitantly. I joined him. There was a sign printed on the door in caps, "Out of order. Sterilization in progress." Inside, there was a room of a dozen dentist-like chairs with Velcro restraints and metal contraptions hanging over them, just like he'd described. All it took was me seeing a splash of red on the ground. And then I was seeing it everywhere, splattered over each headrest and smears on the floor. Blood. There was blood everywhere. I had to look away, swallowing the urge to barf. An eruption of screams rang out further down the hall, and Nick let out a hiss, but I didn't want to look. I couldn't. I recognized voices, ones I'd known my whole life, names I knew, faces. I knew their laughter. I knew how they sounded when they'd had too many beers. I waited to hear her cry, her scream, because I knew it. I knew her scream when she suffered night terrors. The two of us enveloped in my bedsheets, wrapped in our own world, ignoring the screams as best as could. I focused on the room in front of us. What are those things? I didn't realize I was trying to pull the door open until warm hands entangled with mine and pulled me away. "Hey." Nick's grip wasn't soft or reassuring. It hurt, but it was enough to pull me from the depths of despair I was sinking into. His voice sounded strange, like it was a million miles away. Cotton white noise. "Addie. Hey, Addie. You can't lose it now. Okay, we're getting her out of here. Say it with me. We're getting her out of here. And we're going to get away? Okay." I nodded like a child, my chest heaving with sobs, when Nick pulled me through a door at the end of the corridor, and then up a flight of steps. I could barely move my legs. "Addie, talk to me," he murmured, quickening his pace. "We're getting her out. We're getting her out." I gritted out, but then I was looking down at Sadie's blouse, clawing at the front of it. This is blood," I choked, pulling at the material. "Sadie, is she dead?" I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that Sadie was dead. I didn't want to believe it. Nick didn't reply. "Let's go." The second floor was livelier. Men and women in suits were walking up and down carrying talkies, murmuring to each other. A woman had K.J. Leonhardt over her shoulder, though he wasn't moving. I saw something that looked almost black in contrast to his white skin, streaks of it running down his neck and the back of his t-shirt. His body was limp, wrong, loose. It bounced on the woman's back, and it was then when I realized the boy was dead. But he wasn't a red. He wasn't a defect. I would have known. I would have known his face. Nick grabbed me and pulled me back, flattening the two of us against the wall. "Don't move," he whispered. "Don't speak. Don't breathe." When I pressed my hand over my mouth, I immediately felt warmth. It ran down my face in hot rivulets, staining my fingers. When droplets hit the white floor, I scrubbed them away with my foot. I hadn't realized my head had started to hurt, a dull ache beginning to crawl across the back of my skull. Nick was quick, dragging me down the corridor, and somehow managing to keep his eye in his socket. He peered into the glass of each door, while I stumbled along, my head spinning, blood sputtering from my nose. I was fading in and out of reality, the pain pounding in my ears and nose, at the back of my throat, when Nick's hand detached from mine. "Wait." He stopped outside one door, peering inside. I staggered to a stop, pressing pressure to my nose, but it wasn't stopping. "What is it?" Nick let out a shuddery breath. "See for yourself." Inside the room I found myself looking inside was a classroom-like setting. The blues were just like Nick had said. They were perfected of flaws, anything that made them who they were. Now they were dolls. I looked for emotion on their faces, some kind of expression, but there was none. Dressed in the same clothes as Nick, they sat at wooden desks, while a guard loomed over each one. They faced a white wall where a bigger version of the film we had watched on the bus was being projected on the wall. I recognized those same colors, and they hurt my head. I had to tuck away. They were a lot brighter than what I had seen, bathing each face in crimson red and sickly yellow, followed by blue, red, yellow, blue, green, repeat. Nick straightened up. "So this is some kind of school," he muttered. "Purples are taken to be fixed downstairs, and blues, since they're already perfect, are put in front of those colors again. But why?" I whispered. "What are they doing to them?" I searched his expression for an answer, After all, Nick was smart. He was the smartest out of the three of us. At first I was worried he'd been inflicted by the colors too. But then he gripped my hand. Fuck, Nick let out a whine. Is that Addie? Is that who I think it is? Following his gaze, I scanned each student's face until I saw her. I saw Bobby. And all of me shattered. I can't explain what it was like. It felt like I was swallowing glass. Like I was being pulled deep down into the depths of the ocean, choking on ice water. Nick was there. But I couldn't feel him. I couldn't. Oh God, I couldn't feel his steely grip. His warm fingers. I couldn't smell the cheap Axe spray and the stink of his exotic plants. He was there, and he wasn't. Instead, I was drowning. I don't want to write about what I saw. At least not now. Because it hurts. It hurts thinking about it. I can still feel ... what I felt. I can feel my throat closing up. My chest tightening, my heart pounding in my ears. I have to stop, like I told you at the start. I have to take breaks. I have to steady myself. I will post soon, probably tomorrow.